Let's pray together. So, Father, now as we come and open your word, we ask that you would move by your Spirit, that you would exalt Jesus, and that we would know the blessedness of which David speaks in Psalm 32 when he says, "Blessed is the one whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Blessed is the man against whom you, Lord, count no iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit." Do that now among us, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. And so it begins, right? This is the Minor Prophets. Today we kick off our series, and we're starting here in the book of Hosea. And the first thing that we should notice about the book of Hosea is the power of metaphor. The power of metaphor. It's been said that metaphor is the communication art that integrates the invisible world with the visible. Metaphors help us to see things that are otherwise unseen. Okay, this is what I mean. For example, take sin against God. What is sin against God? Well, we could say that sin against God is simply, it's sin against God. Right? It is what it is. Sin against God is sin against God, and that would work. That's one way to say it, or we could say it like this. Sin against God is when a woman is married to a husband, and this husband is a good man. This husband loves her and cares for her, and yet this woman leaves her husband. She abandons his love, and she goes to sell her body on the streets. And in the pipe, she flies to the motherland, sells love to another man. And she does this because she wants to, not because she has to. She wants to go out tonight. She has white lips and a pale face and ripped gloves and wet clothes. And she prefers that over the affection and security given to her by her loving husband. And as sad as it sounds, the saddest thing of all is that she's not very sad about it. She boasts in it. She actually relishes the entire thing. That's another way to describe sin against God. And that way of explaining it is actually the way Hosea does for us here in this book. Actually, it doesn't just explain it that way. Hosea actually, he dramatizes it for us that way. And if we're going to understand what God is saying to us in the book of Hosea, we have to understand this metaphor. And so what I want us to do today, I want us to go ahead and start there right now and just look basically three simple things I want us to see. One, today in Hosea, I want us to see first the grossness of sin, second the necessity of judgment, and then third the insanity of mercy. So grossness of sin, necessity of judgment, insanity of mercy, and we'll start here with the grossness of sin. And when I say grossness of sin, I mean sickness or nastiness or griminess. Let's just look at how Hosea describes it in chapter 2. To bring you up to speed on where we are in chapter 2, in chapter 1, you guys may be familiar with this story. God tells Hosea to go and to marry a prostitute and to start a family with her, and to do all of this as a symbol of Israel's spiritual adultery to God. And so Hosea does this. Hosea goes out and he marries a woman named Gomer. That's right, a woman named Gomer. And so I like to throw this in every now and then. If you're looking for baby names in here, new parents, this is one you can mark off your list here, Gomer. So Hosea marries Gomer, and they have 3 children. And each of these kids are given special names. First, there's Jezreel, which means God will sow. There's Lo Ruhamah, which means no mercy. And then the third little one is Lo Ami, which means not my people. And you could add those 3 baby names to your list too. To mark, this is the list, this is the mark off list. So you can mark those off again. Just kind of narrowing it down to a few. Melissa and I have had practice with baby names. So if you need some advice, that's free advice right there. Mark those 4 off your list. So these little, you got Hosea, you got Gomer, and you got the 3 little kids running around. You got little God will sow, you got little no mercy, and you got little not my people. And the main symbol that we should see in this book, especially the first 3 chapters, is Gomer. And it's that Gomer is a prostitute, and Hosea has married her. And Hosea marrying Gomer, Gomer as Hosea's wife, is the symbol of Israel's idolatry. Gomer, Hosea's wife, is a real-life drama of a heart that has turned away from God. And so I want us to understand the metaphor here. It goes like this. Listen carefully here. When Hosea is taught, because it can be kind of confusing. This book can be, it's kind of hard. It's not very systematic. It's just kind of all melting together. So this may help us here. When Hosea is talking about Gomer the prostitute, it's God talking about Israel and her idolatry, which is relevant to anyone whose heart has turned from God. And what is said here in chapter 2 uncovers for us the grossness of sin. It basically is like divorce court. God is saying that Israel is no longer his wife because of her unfaithfulness, and then he describes for us how this unfaithfulness looks. Let me just give you 3 words here that I think summarize the grossness of sin in chapter 2. First is bargain, block, and barrel. Bargain, block, and barrel. First look at the bargain here, verse 5. For their mother has played the whore. She who conceived them has acted shamefully, for she said, I will go after my lovers who give me my bread and my water, my wool and my flax, my oil and my drink. Now the lovers mentioned here, the men that Gomer has been sleeping with late at night when she leaves home. These are the pagan nations, and Israel has been forming different alliances with these pagan nations. Basically, Israel has been making agreements with these pagan nations in exchange for stuff. She wants bread and water and wool and flax, and she wants it so badly that she is abandoning God and going out late at night, as it were, and she is selling her body for it. That's the bargain that's been made. Israel gives and Israel gets. That's what a bargain is, right? A bargain is an exchange. To get what you want, it's going to cost you something. Sin, idolatry, when we put other things before God, it will always make us pay something. The question is what? So I just want to ask you right now, what kind of bargain is put on the table before you? How much is sin and idolatry asking you to pay? Because it's asking something. There is some bargain on the table. The question is, what? See, Gomer valued her prostitution revenue more than she valued Hosea's love, and therefore she was willing to pay whatever she had to. As long as you give me this, Gomer would say, as long as you give me this, you can do whatever you want with my body. And in our sin, when we turn from God, something like that is the bargain that we make. And one of the big problems here is that deals like that will always go sideways. They don't work. Sin, idolatry, when we put things before God, it will always ask of us more than we are willing to pay, and it will never be able to keep up its end of the bargain. It's true. It never works out. You will pay more than you thought you agreed to pay, and sin will not deliver what you thought you were going to get. It won't happen. Just won't happen. Maybe for a while things are going to go okay, but it won't last. And God will see to that. God will make sure it doesn't last, which comes to that second word. That was bargain. Now look at block. Bargain, now block, Hosea 2 verse 6. Therefore, I will hedge up her way with thorns, and I will build a wall against her so that she cannot find her paths. Now, some English translations here actually use the word block. So if you have an NIV, the NIV puts it, therefore I will block her path with thorn bushes. And what this means is that God will frustrate Israel's idolatry. You know, sin, and we know this, sin is very accessible. But for the Christian, sin is never easy. In this case, in Israel's case, God blocked the roads of commerce that Israel traveled to make deals with other nations. It's like Hosea knew that Gomer was leaving the house every night to drive down to the red light district. You know, it's half an hour past 12, and he knows she goes out, and she goes down the road to downtown red light district. And so what he does is he starts hiding her keys. Or maybe he slashes the tires of her car. Maybe what he does is he actually goes down to the corner of the street where she gets most of her business, and he installs a row of street lights and an ice cream shop and maybe a Build-A-Bear store. You guys ever been in those things? My kids want to go every time. They go to the mall. They want to go to the Build-A-Bear store. So maybe he does that. Maybe her favorite corner where all the action is, there's just lights there, an ice cream shop, and a Build-A-Bear store. And maybe he changes the names on all the street signs, and he completely redevelops downtown. He makes PV Park into a big family-friendly hockey rink. And he just does whatever he has to do to make it harder for Gomer to do what she does. You see? He frustrates her idolatry. God gets in the way. And I would think that probably feels like judgment. But it's actually not this part. See, judgment in the Bible on us here and now, in this world, in most cases, it's more like Romans 1 than fire and brimstone, which means God's judgment on us here is like when he gives us over to the sin. That's what's happening in Romans 1, where Paul says 3 times, God gave them up to the lust of their flesh, the lust of their heart. So in many cases, God's judgment on sin now is when he stops getting in the way. So if God is making our sin unpleasant, if God is blocking our way to idolatry, we should see that as a kindness. We should see that as a kindness. And the main way that I think this works here, the main way God blocks us is through our conscience. And we want that. We want God to build a really high wall in our conscience. When it comes to the roads that we travel to sin and idolatry, we want Him to throw as much stuff in the way as possible. I mean, like when we come to the road, we're at the road here. This road leads to sin and to idolatry. We want Him to take our shoes away and make us come to the road barefoot. And we want this road that we have to walk down to be filled with like sharp nails and broken glass and poisonous snakes and lions and tigers and bears and like a bunch of rabid dogs foaming at the mouth just looking. We want this road that we have to walk down to sin to be filled with as much stuff that would keep us from going down it as possible. Does that make sense? We want stuff to be on this road to block us from traveling down the road. And just know here, I'm not just talking about pornography here. I'm talking about when I'm tempted to get angry at my kids, or when we're tempted to gossip about a neighbor, or when we are put in a position to compromise our integrity. We want God to block us. We don't want to sin, right? We want as many blocks put on the roads that lead to sin and idolatry to impede our way. And God does that. He does. God puts up the blocks. But then there's the barrel. Sometimes He puts up the blocks and we just barrel straight through. That's the third word. So we got bargain, we got block, now we have barrel. Check out verse 7. She shall pursue her lovers, but not overtake them. She shall seek them, but not find them. Now the blocks don't always work, because the word here, pursue, is an intensive verb, which means it doesn't really just mean pursue. It means it's like to really pursue. That's how you read that word. You really pursue. So back in verse 5, it was Israel. This is how it put it. Israel goes after her lovers. She's going after her lovers. Here, is Israel intensely pursuing her lovers. And what that means is that you stand at the road that is blocked, and you're barefoot, and there's glass, and there's snakes, and there's rabid dogs all down the road, and you just barrel down the road anyway. You don't care about your feet. You don't care about the dogs. You don't care how bad it's blocked. You just run down it anyway. You're so intent on getting to the sin that you lower your shoulder and you pound your way through, and you don't want anything to stop you. And what happens is when you get to the end of that road and your feet are bleeding and you've been bitten all over your legs by these dogs, you get to the end of the road and what you're looking for is not there. It's gone. See, this intense pursuit of her lovers is when Gomer finds that all the tires to her car are flat, and she looks down and she sees the lights are on, and she sees kids eating ice cream and holding their Build-A-Bears and all that, and she's still so determined. She's so determined to get her goods that she just drops her coat right there, and she tries to solicit anyone who walks by. She drops her coat and just tries to get anyone who walks by, and nobody buys. Nobody wants anything to do with her. That's the grossness of sin as described in chapter 2. So we can say an overall understanding of sin as described in chapter 2 here of Hosea. That's sin, bargain, block, and barrel. That's a new euphemism for sin. Bargain, block, and barrel, right? Sin, bargain, block, and barrel. The bargains we make, God blocks it, we barrel through. And that brings us to the necessity of judgment. Just to be clear here, Israel's doing all this, and it's not okay. Right? This is not good. This is not good stuff. And to amplify the grossness of sin, and as a way to segue now into God's judgment, notice verse 8. Notice what verse 8 says. And she did not know that it was I who gave her the grain, the wine, and the oil, and who lavished on her silver and gold, which they used for Baal. So in other words, all the stuff that Israel has been chasing in her whoredom with other nations was actually stuff that only God could provide. Israel wanted grain and wine. She wanted grain and wine so badly that she sold her body for it. And didn't she know that God is the one who owns all the grain? Doesn't Israel know that she is abandoning the great winemaker to go and get wine from these other men? God himself is the giver of all good gifts, and somewhere along the way, Israel thought they came from Baal. Baal was the false Canaanite god. So what happened is Israel takes the gifts that God gives Israel, and Israel thinks they're from Baal, and so she uses those gifts to worship Baal. We can see this throughout the Old Testament. It's one of those times, one of those, I think, awful experiences in Scripture when we, as readers, feel the dramatic irony of things like this that take place. So remember, dramatic irony is when an audience understands more of what's going on than the characters in the story. Remember how that works? So we're readers, we're reading the story, and we actually can see more of what's happening than the actual characters on the page. And here's an example. We know early on in the Bible that God despises child sacrifice. This is what he tells Israel in Deuteronomy 18:9. He says that none of them should ever burn their son or their daughter as an offering. It's evil. It should never happen. Never, God tells his people, never sacrifice your children. Never do that. And then when we come to 2 Kings 16, we read about Judah's king Ahaz. You guys remember Ahaz? He began to reign, and he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord his God, as his father David had done, but he walked in the way of the kings of Israel. He even burned his own son as an offering, according to the despicable practices of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. Now we see more clearly than Ahaz, obviously. We see how messed up this is. We see it. Like we get what's happening here. Before he even does it, we know this is not good. Ahaz, the false god Molech or Baal or whoever, doesn't give people children. Baal doesn't give people children, but Ahaz, as well as Israel, took their children as gifts from these false gods, and they offered these children to these false gods as a sacrifice. This is how Ezekiel puts it in Ezekiel 16. And you took your sons and your daughters whom you had born to me, and you sacrificed them to Baal, to be devoured. were your whoring so small a matter that you slaughtered my children and delivered them up as an offering by fire to them? See what he says here. God says, I've given you the children. We see that. We know that. We know that in Scripture. Children are a blessing from the Lord. The Lord. And yet Israel is so far gone, so deeply deceived, that she thinks these children came from a false god, and so these children are sacrificed to a false god. She is killing her children, and she thinks that she's doing the right thing. Get this. Israel is killing her children, and she thinks she's doing the right thing. Could we ever imagine something like that happening? God gives the children, and yet a whole society of people slaughter these children to the god of Baal. Or say, maybe the god of choice. Or say, maybe the god of reproductive freedom. Side note here. This is a good question for us might be, we can read stories, the Bible and everything else, and we can see dramatic irony taking place. We can see things that the characters can't see, and it's a really neat thing as a reader, as an audience. One question, though, just to ask yourself, if someone was reading your story, if someone's kind of standing outside of your story, and they're reading your life, what might be the dramatic irony that they are seeing right now that you're not? Just a question to ask yourself. If someone's reading your life right now, imagine someone's reading, looking from afar at what's going on in your life. What might they be seeing? What do they see that you can't recognize? Just a side note. All right, done with that. All right, so God gave Israel all the grain and the wine and the gold and the silver. We see that in the Bible. The dramatic irony here is that Israel doesn't get it. Israel thinks this came from Baal. Hosea gives Gomer everything she needs. Hosea protects her, cares for her, takes her shopping. He gives her all kinds of good things. And she thinks that all this is coming from the strange men that she sleeps with every night. And it's just not a matter of giving credit to the wrong person. But Gomer takes the gifts that Hosea gives her, and she uses those gifts to impress more strange men. Okay, she's taking the good things that Hosea gives her, and she's using those good things to find more lovers that she can sell her body to. And God says, no. He's going to judge this. He's going to come, and He's going to put a stop to this. And we hardly need an explanation why. The reality of sin here is so clear that we hardly need any explanation for why God sends judgment. We see what's happening. We see the whoredom that's going on here. Israel has made the one true sovereign God of the universe a cuckold. In a complete reverse, rather than spread the truth about God to the nations, Israel is spreading lies about Him. Israel is saying that what she gets at home isn't good enough. And God says, no more. He's great and holy and righteous and pure. God is the giver of all good things. And these lies are going to be stopped. Verse 9, therefore, I will take back my grain in its time and my wine in its season. Verse 10, now I will uncover her lewdness in the sight of her lovers, and no one shall rescue her out of my hand. This means that God is going to shame Israel. He's going to strip her of the gifts that He's given her. He's going to expose her crudeness to everyone. There will be no more parties, no more red lipstick and tight little skirts. All the prostitution revenue that she has built up is going to be burned, and nobody is going to help her. All the strange men, all the other lovers, they're going to turn on her. They're going to laugh at her. They're going to want nothing to do with her. And when that happens, that's when you know idolatry is judged. What we have tried to worship in the place of God will eventually devour us. It will crush us. God will let it do that. And when it does, there will be a loneliness felt unlike any loneliness before. Loneliness that is the judgment of God. When everything turns against you, it is complete abandonment. Israel played the whore with God, and He, being just and true and right, He brings punishment. He's God, He's holy, He punishes evil. That's how it goes. And again, this part on the necessity of judgment, this is actually the part of this chapter that makes the most sense. I don't think any of you, after hearing Saul read Hosea 2, and we got to the part where God's going to judge Israel, I doubt any of you thought, how could he do that? How dare he? We've seen Gomer do her thing. We know what Israel has been up to. Judgment here is what makes the most sense. What doesn't make sense is what we read in verse 14. It's the insanity of mercy. And you heard it when Sarah was reading, how jarring verse 14 was. It didn't fit. It made no sense. Verse 14. Therefore, behold, I will allure her and bring her into the wild and speak tenderly to her, and there I will give her her vineyards and make the valley of Achor a door of hope. Now, the valley of Achor is a metonymy for curse. It's the place where God's wrath was poured out against Israel's sin back in Joshua 7. And so now God is saying he's making the valley of wrath a door of hope. And there, she shall answer as in the days of her youth, as at the time when she came out of the land of Egypt. And the last part of this verse here is referring to when God first rescued Israel from the land of Egypt. This is going back to when Israel was free for the first time. It's that small window before the golden calf, before she fell into sin and idolatry. And what God is saying here is that His mercy is almost like starting all over again. It means that God's forgiveness is His looking at us as if our sin never happened. It is Him taking us back, turning back time before our sin and saying to us, here you go, all that sin, all that mess is gone. And right now, some of you may have a hard time believing that. It just isn't laying right. Some of you may have a hard time, and you want to instantly start qualifying what I just said and say stuff like, well, there's still consequences to sin. Grace ain't cheap. Mercy isn't free. It's not easy. But I want you to know that mercy, grace isn't cheap. Mercy isn't easy, yes. But no, mercy is always insane. Always insane. I think a lot of times we can lose our marvel in the mercy of God. Mercy can lose its wonder. It becomes unremarkable to us. And that's the case, at least at a cultural level. When we have no category for the severity of our sin and the holiness of God, then forgiveness is just blah, right? Think about it. Who cares if God forgives sin if sin isn't a big deal and God doesn't really mind? For many, because they think that all people are inherently good, and because they think God is just a big teddy bear in the sky, a big Build-A-Bear in the sky, maybe. If you think that way about God, forgiveness means nothing to you. Nothing. When we think we don't really have a problem and that God doesn't really care about what we do, then forgiveness is just another song on the radio. When we sugarcoat our spiritual condition or lose sight of God's greatness, then forgiveness is just an empty idea that might mean something decent, but it will not amaze us. In other words, if we don't understand the grossness of sin and the necessity of judgment, we will never understand the insanity of mercy. Just think for a minute about how hard it is for us, just as people, just as humans with each other. Think about how hard it is for us to extend mercy on a horizontal level. Think about how hard it is for us to extend mercy to others. Even within marriage, right? Two people who are committed, who love each other. Think about how tough it can be sometimes when you feel wronged by the tiniest of things. Think about how hard it is for you to be gracious. Now, I've heard people have issues with this. Friends have told us. But think about that. You're just wronged by this tiniest little thing, and you just want to refuse graciousness, right? Or think about at work or among friends, the coworker, the boss, whoever, who has kind of rubbed you the wrong way. And even in a small thing like that, it is hard for us to show mercy. We want to seal up our graciousness. We want to punish others by withholding restoration. And the reason why is because even in these small things, even in these small horizontal things that happen, even in these small things, forgiveness feels too weird. There is an insanity to forgiveness that makes it seem so out of place when we know it's not deserved. Right? There's an insanity to forgiveness that makes it seem so out of place when we know it's not deserved. And that's the whole point. That's the whole point. Forgiveness is never deserved. Forgiveness is always the unexpected option. God has never owed us forgiveness. We have never deserved His mercy, but He gives it to us because He's God. That's the way He puts it in Hosea 11, verses 8 and 9. Let me read to you. Hosea 11, 8 and 9. How can I give you up, O Ephraim? How can I hand you over, O Israel? How can I make you like Admah? How can I treat you like Zeboam? My heart recoils within me. My compassion grows warm and tender. I will not execute my burning anger. I will not again destroy Ephraim, for I am God and not a man, the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come in wrath. Do you see what God says here? The reason that He forgives sin is because He is God, not man. God forgives sin because He's not like us. He doesn't forgive sin because sin is not a big deal, and He doesn't forgive sin because it doesn't really bother Him. God forgives sin because He is God, and because forgiving sin is insane. It's too much for us. Too much. It's supposed to blow our minds. Forgiveness is supposed to blow our minds. And He doesn't just stop here. Not only does He forgive sin, but He rescues us from the idols that would destroy us. Notice verse 17 in chapter 2. For I will remove the names of the Baals from her mouth, verses 19 and 20. And I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you to me in righteousness and in justice and in steadfast love and in mercy. I will betroth you to me in faithfulness, and you shall know the Lord. This is a wedding here. This is a covenant. God rescues Israel, and He makes a new covenant with her. He brings her back to the innocence she had when she was first rescued from Egypt. In fact, verse 18, verse 18 mentions the covenant with the beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven. That's actually reminiscent of the Garden of Eden. And it's like God brings Israel back to when He first rescued her, back even before Adam and Eve sinned. Right? This is the Garden of Eden. So God's taking Israel all the way back to the Garden of Eden before sin, and He marries her there. And He makes a new covenant with her there. And in this covenant, He actually doesn't just ensure His own faithfulness, He ensures her faithfulness. His promise to her is not only that He will be faithful to her, but He promises Israel that she will be faithful to Him. This is insane. This is insane what is happening here. He does this and He says, little Jezreel, God will sow, I'm going to plant him. Little no mercy, I'm going to show her mercy. Little not my people, she's going to be my people. Gomer, she's now Hosea's faithful bride. That's what chapter 2 says. That's one way to put it. Or we might say it more the way that chapter 3 does. It's a half an hour past midnight again, and Hosea walks out his front door. It's October now, so it's a little bit colder. He zips up his jacket, keeps his head down because it's raining, and he calmly walks to the door of his car, and he opens it. As he sits inside, he starts the car, turns the radio off, and begins driving in the quiet of the night down to Washington Avenue, past the North Loop, just on the outskirts of the city. And when he comes to the last street light there, he parks his car and he gets out. He walks another block or two in the rain until he sees her. Gomer is sitting up against a building, white lips and a pale face, ripped gloves and wet clothes, and she's huddled up between two other girls as they share a cigarette. She's got mascara stains running down the outside of her eyes, and her last layer of lipstick has rubbed off on the cigarette she keeps passing back and forth. And the girls are not talking. They're just sitting there trying to stay warm. And Hosea walks up to her, and he says to her, "Honey, it's me. I'm here to take you home." He stretches out his hand with a stack of cash, and he says to his wife, "I'm taking you for tonight, and I'm taking you for forever." So he reaches down, he holds her hand, he helps her up, he wraps his other arm around her, and as they start walking to his car, he says, "I'm your husband, and you are my wife, and you're not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to let you do this. You're coming with me. I'm going to take care of you because I love you." And they were husband and wife, and they lived happily ever after. Insane. And as insane as this is, Hosea, this whole story, Hosea, he's just pointing to another husband. See, years after Hosea goes and pays for his wife, there was another husband, the true and better husband. And this husband also went to the outskirts of the city, and this husband also paid for his wife. But he didn't pay with a stack of cash or with silver and barley. He paid for his bride with his own life. This husband so loved his wife that he gave himself up for her, dying in her place, absorbing the punishment that she deserved as a whore. And the blood that he shed for her is the blood that he calls the blood of the new covenant. And when we come to the Lord's table and we take this bread and we take this cup, that is what we remember. When we take this cup and we drink, we hear the resurrected Christ saying to us, "I'm your husband, and you are my wife, and you're not going to do that anymore. You're coming with me, and I'm going to take care of you because I love you." Because of his mercy, that is what Jesus says to his church. And everyone here, whatever your story is, however messed up it might be, I want you to know this morning that Jesus offers that same forgiveness to you. He offers it to you. And because this is true, as a church, we want to drink to that. So let me ask the pastors